this has been one of the most difficult things I've had to write in my life. And I'm a writer, so, that's saying a lot. Um, because it's not a question of what to put in, it's a question of what to leave out. The whole shebang is less than an hour. And for me, I've had to really concentrate on the architecture of my house that's built on the rock and leave off all the decorations because there are too many rabbit holes to go down. And, I don't want to miss the structure of my faith journey, which is what I am supposed to be talking about. But at the end, I've planned this so that there should be plenty of time for questions at the end about things I've had to leave out, and also time for reflection on things that you might see in what I've told that maybe I haven't seen, and that maybe could help me to understand more, how this journey of faith has affected me and maybe affected the world or maybe even affected you. So I wrote down what I'm going to say, but I'm going to try to speak it anyway. And so after having known me for 4 years now, you may have some other reflections on what I've left out that maybe is important. So I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, of parents that had roots that went back to New Amsterdam in 1662 on one side, and to the post-potato famine Ireland in the 1900s, but typical white middle-class family. But I was born with a mission, and that was to keep my daddy out of World War II, sorry. And the point of this story is that my parents got married on December 6th, 1941, and they woke up the next morning on their honeymoon with the world at war. And my mother really did not want to see my daddy go away to be a soldier. So along came I towards the end of August, when the draft board wasn't taking men who were married with one child. And then along came Jimmy 13 months later, when the draft board wasn't taking married men with 2 children. And then he got a job at Curtiss-Wright making helicopter parts. So he was able to stay home with my mother and us. My mother cared about good schools. So when I was in kindergarten, the family moved to Ridgewood, New Jersey, which had a well-deserved reputation at that time for one of the better school systems in the country. And when I was just starting 2nd grade there at the age of 7, I had an experience that changed my life for good. My mother sent me on an errand to go and see the church secretary about something. And the church, the Methodist church, was only about 3 blocks from my house, and I was able to walk. And when I walked in through the parish hall door, I turned right instead of left. And I opened the door to the sanctuary. And God was there. There was just no doubt about it. I stayed there for about 10 minutes, maybe, just kind of drinking this all in. And then the next Sunday, after church school, I walked through the door again into the church service, walked up to the 3rd pew on the right, which is where I still sit in every church I go to. And there was a nice lady there who had a fox stole with the paw in the other fox's mouth. And she was next to a handsome looking man who I guessed was her husband. And I said, "Can I sit here with you?" And she said yes. And at the end, she asked if she could drive me home. And I said no, I wasn't allowed to accept rides from strangers. So they called my mother and introduced themselves, and they became my godparents. They were with me through thick and thin, from the time when I joined the church when I was in 4th grade, along with the other 7th graders, to the time that when I was a senior in high school, that I gave a talk on the importance of doing random acts of kindness for people on Youth Sunday. And when I was a young person there, I was the chairperson for my youth group of Christian Witness. And I really had no idea what that was. But in my life, I have definitely found out what that was and tried to do it as much as possible. So that was the first step, major step in my faith journey. Learning came easily to me in a school system with so many good teachers. So I was lucky enough to land a full scholarship at Smith College, and I couldn't refuse that offer. But something happened to me when I was a junior in high school that was going to shape my future at Smith. And that was my best friend from Madrigal's group and all-state choir took me to her church service at the Episcopal Church that she attended in Ridgewood. And when I knelt at the altar rail and received the bread and the wine from the priest, which was quite different from how communion was in the Methodist church, I knew this was where I belonged. There was no question about it. So when I was at Smith, on Sundays when we weren't singing, I was always in whatever choir was available. I would go down to the Episcopal Church, St. John's, down the street from where my house was, and attend the service. And I think that since it was the Kennedy era, and since I was an idealistic kind of person, that the church was a good place for me. And I did more thinking about what the good place in life for me was going to be when I was at school. And I decided that since I had an interest in foreign languages and was good at that, and an interest in history, that it would be a good thing for me to be in the Foreign Service. And I had visited the UN when I was in 9th grade and decided that I wanted to make my life work working for peace. I gave up the idea of being a missionary in Africa somewhere along the way. And so I took the test for the Foreign Service when somebody came around to administer it, and I passed it. So I had to decide what I was going to do. And since I had gotten into Indiana University to study Russian, I got them to let me say that I could defer my career entrance to the Foreign Service until I finished my master's degree in Russian in 2 years. Well, the 2 years passed, and remember what I said, that I chose the Foreign Service because I wanted to work for peace? Well, now we're in May of 1966, and we're involved heavily in the war in Vietnam, and there was no way that a career in the Foreign Service equated with working for peace. So I gave it up. I never matriculated, or whatever they say. I went down to the DIA and interviewed with them, and that didn't seem any better. So I wrote a letter to all the different schools in the area of northern Indiana. I had finished at Indiana University, so there were connections there. And I got a job teaching Russian at Valparaiso University up near Chicago. And for me, that road less traveled by has been, excuse me, full of twists and turns, ups and downs, but it definitely was the road for me. And I'm going to take a drink of coffee because I got a frog in my throat, and then I'll come back. Except it isn't coffee, it's tea with apple cider. So it was my good fortune, actually, that I stayed for 5 years in Indiana, because it slowed me down a lot. You know, as a kind of a type A, you know, New England person, I had a tendency to, you know, go too fast and so forth. I learned how to talk with shopkeepers and the cleaning ladies, and it was really good for me. But I came back east after 3 years of teaching Russian because I did not like teaching a foreign language, but I really did like teaching. So I went to Wesleyan University and got a Master of Arts in Teaching and History, which was my undergraduate major. And when I graduated, I started teaching in Fairfield County high schools, history and English. So that was good. A good choice for me. So by this time, my internal clock was ticking away loudly, and I looked over the field of men that were available and chose a shopkeeper of a specialty tobacco shop who worked in the town where I was teaching. And after a 1-year courtship, we got married. And I think that we wanted to start a family right away, but things did not happen. And after 6 years, we gave up on that after trying everything that was then available. And we adopted a little girl from Korea, Katie, my older child, in 1978, March. And I resigned from teaching. The store was doing well, and I didn't need to contribute to the family income. So I did what I always wanted to do, and that was be a stay-at-home mom. And 2.5 years later, we adopted a little boy from the Philippines, Jordan, and then I had my family. But all was not sweetness and light in our household, because my husband developed diabetes, and he was the kind of patient that did everything that the doctor told him not to, and his condition kept getting worse and worse. And there were mood swings that were involved, and the violence, oral and physical, was mainly directed against my younger child, Jordan. And after 13 years of dealing with this situation, which was deteriorating, I divorced. So there I was, a single parent with an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. And life looked pretty stressful and pretty complicated. And I really didn't know how I was going to make my way through life. And in the meantime, I had actually gotten confirmed as an Episcopalian. I did want to make an honest person of myself, because I had said in my application to adopt the children that I was an Episcopalian, because that was necessary for the agency I work through, that you be a member of a Christian church. So I made an honest woman of myself and converted to being an Episcopalian. And one November Sunday, when I was seated in adult formation, something happened, the second thing that was really major, or third, I guess. Yeah, that was really major in my life. And that was that we got a new assistant minister, Armand, and he gave a talk, and he described life not as the circle of seasons going round and round and getting nowhere, just repeating itself. That was my image. He described it as a wheel rolling forward and getting bigger and more inclusive all the time. And this clicked with me. I realized that this was sort of a moment for me where my whole perception of life changed, and it was a gestalt. Everything looked different. And when I talk to myself or other people of being born again, I really feel that that was the moment that I was born again. And luckily, Dr. LaValle started up an EFM group when January rolled around and a new semester came, and I joined it right away. I sort of felt as though I had been drowning as sort of a castaway on the sea, and all of a sudden there was a life rope, and I grabbed it and held on for dear life. So for the next 3 years, come heck or high water, the night before we were going to have our EFM meeting, I would stay up really late, in my reclining chair, half sleeping and half reading, making sure that I had done the readings and was prepared, because this was like a central point in my life. And in the meantime, I had the temerity to try marriage again. And it didn't work out any better the second time than it had the first time, but it took me only 6 years instead of 13 years to realize that I was on the right track, wrong track. So 3 years into that marriage, I actually had to stop EFM because my husband was giving me flack about going out in the evening, and I had gotten 2 stepchildren. And so I just had to let that go and not do the 4th year. But I came back to it because after the second divorce, nobody was telling me where I should go in the evenings. So I finished it, and this was really important to me because at that time, they had a project, a mission project, where you had to do something that showed that you could carry your newfound faith or deepened faith in God out into the world and do some kind of a project. And I made my project an audio business card. And this was all the rage in the early 1990s. You did a cassette tape that told what your philosophy of working in the world of finance was going to be. Because by that time, when my first divorce took place, I had had to go back to work. And I went back to work as a financial counselor and insurance agent. And you have to find clients. And, you know, this became a really, really good way of finding clients because I explained that my philosophy of financial planning was a business application of the golden rule, that I was going to do unto my neighbor what I would like to have done to me and treat my clients like my flock. And it was very successful project. I got people from my church to do endorsements, and people from my neighborhood and people I knew from small businesses in town, personal clients, individual clients, you know, small business clients. And I made enough money doing that to be able to send my son, Jordan, whose problems had really multiplied by that time, to a school for children with emotional and learning problems, which he also had, and to pay for the first 2 years of Katie's college studies. So EFM was extremely important in my life. And there are 6 people that I know of that became priests through this. And there are probably many others I don't know of because I moved away, so I didn't follow up with the program after I had gone to the eastern part of the state. But besides doing the audiovisual card, there was something that was much more important, which I learned in EFM, which is a major basis of communication between me and other people that I meet as I go through life. And that is when people tell me of some sadness or some difficulty or some difficult decision they're trying to make. In my life, I've tried to cultivate being a good listener and then say, I'll pray for you. And in the almost 30 years of doing this, I have never once had anybody say anything other than thank you. So I've discovered that when you say that you will pray for somebody, and if you actually do it, there's a level of caring, and you want to follow up. You want to find out, you know, next time you see that person, how are things going? You know, how can I help you? So on and so forth. And this is what I think has made the kind of life that I have possible. because now I can relate to almost anyone and be a good friend and be a good Christian at the same time. And also, I developed a lot of self-confidence. By the end of the second divorce, you would think that I would be a mess, but it was just the opposite. I knew that God and I could handle almost anything, and I searched intentionally for God's will for me, sure that I would find it. And I really did, because in the next year, I met the real love of my life, and we had wonderful 8 years together. We both sold our homes in the New York City suburbs, moved out to his log cabin in the eastern part of Connecticut. And it was on 10 acres of woodland / wetland. And we spent our whole last year together there. He was 10 years older than I was, and he had a heart condition. And when we were on vacation in early 2001 in the Galapagos Islands, he had a heart attack as we were snorkeling, and he passed away. So where to go from here? In the 16 years between then and my arrival at St. Andrew's doorstep, following the path that I chose as God led me, took me on a journey that took all the courage that I really could muster. I lived on my own in the cabin in Lebanon for 6 years, working part-time in the financial profession and part-time as a long-term substitute in the local school system. I joined the Episcopal Church. And when the Peace Corps wouldn't take me at age 65 when I retired, because I take regular medication for a medical condition, I interviewed for a position that was offered as a teaching missionary in the bilingual school in San Pedro Sula, where they were looking for teachers of English. I got the position, was recommended by my priest who had seen the advertisement. And the day after I turned 65, I was on the plane en route to San Pedro Sula in Honduras. So once I was there, I discovered I really liked Honduras. And after the first year, I'm not being a city girl, I moved out to the port city of Puerto Cortes. And the first day of my English class there, my 12th graders, I met the grandson of the person I was going to marry in Honduras. And his name was Eduardo. And he was a retired teacher like me and an author of some repute there, especially for children's books for school kids from maybe middle school all the way up to through college age. And after a year courtship, we did marry. And this was a good marriage. I left teaching after that year and became his translator and did some writing on my own. And here's my show and tell. This is my translation of his first most famous book called Benito the Pelican. We also did a bilingual version of this. And here is my translation of his book for older children, which is called Innocent Stories. You can't see it very well, but that's a Honduran girl in an indigenous costume. And then I wrote a book for little kids that were just beginning to study English called A Boy, a Girl, and a Snake. And if anybody has kids that are from like 3 until 18, if you might like to take a look at this because it's neat and I have some extra copies. So this was a good life for me. And I enjoyed it. I lived with his family. It was safe in a place that was getting more unsafe day by day. And I also met the closest friend I've ever had, and her name's Isa. And she was a 16-year-old in my English class. And the first comment that she made in my class told me that this was a person of unusual wisdom and much older than her chronological age, and that our lives were going to be connected in some way. And I was absolutely right, because when I retired from teaching and when she graduated, I became her mentor all the way through the 6 years of law school at the university in San Pedro Sula. And for 1 year here at Penn State, when she came to study as a degreed attorney in Honduras in the Master of Laws program. And her idea was to go back and become a lawyer there and do what she had been doing, and that was help women to get titles to their property, to get the rights that they need, to help with the water situation, because there were already disputes about how to use water and who had the rights to it, and do other things having to do with the environment. But it was too dangerous for her to go back. So we figured hopefully this will blow over. She got an OPT, an optional professional training, to work for the dean of the law school, recruiting students from Latin America. So for the next 2 years, that's what she did on minimum wage. She went to Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, I can't even remember where all else, Mexico. Last year, she recruited more than 90 students for the School of International Affairs and for the MLS program. And she signed up for the School of International Affairs and graduated last weekend. Thank God, because financing all of this, which was supposed to be 1 year, took us to the limits of our creativity. She took loans with the OAS and a local bank. I ended up taking a loan with my bank in order to get her through. We did fundraisers. We did everything you can imagine. So many people from the village and from St. Andrews, and major effort was put forward by Father Jeff. Somehow, without going bankrupt and without having to quit, she and I managed to survive this. And doing all this was scary to the nth degree, but I knew that I was doing what God wanted me to do. And when she thought she was going to go back a year ago, I said to her, no way. I wouldn't even let you get on the plane, because you are not supposed to go back. They are to have the gangs kill you because you won't become their lawyer. You're staying here. And somehow we made that work out. So I think that starting each day by picking up my cross and following Jesus has taken me places where I never thought to go, that I'd be able to, and it's molded me into a person that my former self would scarcely even recognize. And I'm still feeling my way into what I think my mission is here in State College and at St. Andrews, but I think I'm on the right path. So to sum up the tale of this pilgrim, following God's way has been rewarding, but really scary. However, I find myself asking each time I doubt that I'm on the right track, along with Simon Peter, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And that's the end so far. So now you can ask, if you wish, about all the things that I've had to leave out. And that is my pets, the languages I speak, the cruises, and the different travels that I've had in various places of the world, the sports I like, my anti-war and Democratic Party activism, poetry, opera, choral singing, what it's like to have a trans child or an adopted, international kids, my fairy grandchildren, because I don't have any real ones, so I adopt them, wherever I see them, what I do in the Sierra Club and the Nittany Valley Environmental Coalition, what I do as a volunteer at St. Paul, what it's like to live in Honduras, what it's like to live in another country for 10 years, Al-Anon, Creation Care Corps, and Newcomers Outreach, and ideas I get in the shower, and gardening, and reading when I get a chance, and what I think I do best, and that is building connections between people and institutions that all are on the same page. And also what it's like to live in a place where it's mainly people who don't espouse my party and people who do like to eat red meat and do have cars. And the fact that I scarcely fit in, but somehow I managed to, live here happily anyway. So that's it, everybody. The field is open.